It's important that we maintain our agreement not to disclose the location of my family's property. In exchange, I will do my best to explain to you what I know about these creatures you call dogmen. My first encounter with these creatures was when I was 12 years old. My family's lineage goes back to 1832, when Taylor, Mississippi was founded. My family was some of the first people to move into this area. They worked the mills owned by Mr. John Taylor himself, founder of Taylor, Mississippi. Eventually, the Lockett family, my ancestors, were able to acquire a sizable piece of land, where my grandfather, Edward Lockett Sr., and grandmother, Virginia Lockett, built a farm. My mother, Elizabeth Lockett, died at childbirth, and I was raised by my father, Edward Jr., and my grandparents. As a boy, I was responsible for a number of chores around our property, ranging from feeding the hogs and chickens to gathering corn from the fields, simple tasks that children today never do. The property my family owns is very large, with areas that have never been explored. To give you a description, if you can imagine a 5-acre rectangular clearing in the woods. The property is oriented north to south, with our home at the southeast corner of the clearing. Behind our home is a cornfield that extends the entire depth of the clearing, moving north, and it stops 75 feet from the wood line. To the west of the cornfield was our barn, hog pens, chicken coops, and storage shed. Further west was a ridge line that ran along the length of the clearing and beyond. At the base of the ridge was a drainage ditch, and moving inward, back towards the house, was a dirt road. I was told that the property was purchased from the Chickasaw Indians. The Chickasaw were a proud and civilized people with their own laws and religion. They were above all other things warriors, and developed a reputation as a fierce fighting force. My father told me that deep within the boundaries of our property was the heart of the Chickasaw Nation, a place where they buried their dead and praised their gods. Life was very quiet on our farm for many years, until 1948 when my grandfather signed a deal to provide oak and hickory wood to a local sawmill. From that day on, the property was teeming with life, logging trucks going back and forth, and people constantly on the land. The dirt road was widened, and trees were cleared deep into the woods, creating a roadway that led to the backside of our property. After 2 weeks of clearing work, my father and I drove the roadway that extended at least 7 miles deep into the woods. There were these huge oak trees with limbs that grew in all types of directions, twisting and turning, covered with moss. You could tell that this area had not been disturbed by humans in a very long time. It had a feeling to it, like there was something just beneath the surface, waiting or lurking. My father was not very comfortable in this area at all. As I climbed the limbs, he urged me to return to the truck. The look on his face was one I will never forget. It was the face of fear, fear of the unknown. He knew something was not right. The following week, full-scale logging commenced on the property. A crew of 30 men, along with a foreman named Mr. David, were present on the property daily. Grandfather, along with his best friend Barnabas, spent hours deep in the woods hunting and trapping. It was on one of these hunting trips where my grandfather was first alerted to something being wrong on the property. While deep beyond the area where the loggers were working, they came across several severed deer heads, just the heads only, and one of the heads had been positioned on top of a stick and stuck into the ground. It seemed like a marker of some sort. Barnabas described the feeling of being watched on all angles during dinner that night. He said it was almost as if the forest was alive. Not long after that, tales started coming in from the loggers about fast-moving figures that would follow them out of the woods. and they began to leave the area long before sunset. Mr. David, the foreman, was not a superstitious man at all. He insisted that the men worked every hour of daylight possible. I remember. It was a Tuesday evening, right before sunset, when a group of loggers came barreling down the road in a pickup truck, driving like they were running for their lives. They were met at the front of the property by Mr. David, who stood there blocking the road. Mr. David was a big man. He towered over most men at 6 feet 9 inches. He had worked in the logging business since he was 19 years old. Standing there in front of the speeding truck, I knew he was fearless. The men came to a stop just before they hit him, and all exited the truck, some looking backwards towards the woods and up at the ridge line, and others just looked like they saw a ghost. Simultaneously, they all began to speak like a symphony of chaos and fear. The overwhelming point being made was that one of the men had disappeared. He was gone. They only were able to find his torn shirt with blood on it, but nothing else. Now, these men were loggers, some of the toughest people I have ever known. They had seen death over and over, gruesome deaths, horrible accidents. But whatever this was, this time was something unnormal, even for them. One of the men said, "I was talking to him. He was right there behind me. Then I heard a grunt, and he was gone. He vanished in thin air. There's something in these woods, something we don't need to be messing with, sir." Mr. David, my father, Barnabas, and my grandfather all went into the woods that night looking for the missing logger. When they returned, they all were speaking in hushed tones, something that was unusual for my household. See, there were very few secrets held in my house. My grandfather, Ed Sr., didn't believe in secrets. He believed that a boy should be raised to be a man. But that night, something was being kept a secret, and I knew it. That secret came spilling out at 4:30 a.m. the next morning. The dogs on the property began to bark like I've never heard them bark before. We had 4 dogs. They were all mixed breeds, German Shepherds and Collies, which made them both huge and smart animals. But this barking was different than anything I ever heard before. When I moved to the living room, everyone was already awake, weapons in hand and at the ready. Confused, I asked my grandma, "What's going on?" That's when she told me they had shot a big animal in the woods earlier, and they believed the others had followed them back to the house. The dogs were quickly brought into the house, and my grandmother and I were rushed up to the attic. Below, we could hear the dogs running from room to room inside the house, barking and growling. Then, above all the noise of the dogs and the sound of everyone talking, came a growling sound, so powerful that I swear it shook the floorboards in the attic. My grandmother moved towards the front attic window and looked out. She never quite described what she saw to me. There really was no need for her to. By the way she reacted, I knew it was some type of monster. Then there was the sound of something smashing against the side of the house. Not the sound of something ramming, but the sound of something smashing against the side of the house over and over again. That was followed by gunfire that lasted for the next hour and a half. Shots rang out into the night. There were multiple growls that rumbled the house, silencing the dogs all at once. Then there was a howl in the distance, and all activity stopped. Later that morning, my grandmother packed her things and went 2 towns over to stay with Mr. David's wife. She didn't say much as she left, and I can still remember the touch of her hand on my head as she walked away. That day, there were more loggers on the property than I had ever seen, but they were not equipped with saws. They were equipped with shotguns and rifles. There was a large crowd of men gathered along the side of the house, standing there talking. When I finally worked my way through to see what they were talking about, it was a dead hog. It had been smashed against the house, until it was nothing more than a blob of fat, blood, and bone. Blood spatter was all along the walls of the house, and the smell of blood and the sound of flies made my stomach turn and bent. There were large canine prints that seemed to be everywhere around our house. That day, we ventured deep onto the property in search of these beasts. 34 men and one little boy entered the woods that day. The landscape varied from small hills and ridges surrounded by large moss-covered oak trees that barely let any sunlight in, to wetlands that were hard to travel, my 12-year-old body waist-deep in water, gun high above my head. There, beyond the wetlands, we came across these giant structures. They looked like some form of a nest where someone or something had burrowed its way into the ground. By noon, we were tracking our way back out of there to the trucks when Mr. David and my father found what they believed to be a Chickasaw burial mound. There was a number of large rocks that formed a rectangular shape inside a small clearing. The ground rose steeply, forming a large mound flanked by 2 trees. The discovery seemed to bother Mr. David, and he hurried us away back to the truck. We arrived back at the house right before sundown and met the men in the barn to do a head count. All 34 men were present, and 10 men volunteered to stay in the barn and serve as armed guards for the night. Ed Sr., Ed Jr., Barnabas, and David all stayed in the house. 2 dogs were placed in the barn, and the other 2 were left inside the house. That night, my father stepped out onto the back porch for a smoke, and that was the first time I saw the Dogman with my own eyes. I was opening the porch door to bring my father some matches when I saw a large figure standing among the rows of corn in the field. The corn had begun to die and was turning brown, and this massive gray figure stood out from the moonlight. Charlie, the largest of all 4 dogs, came flying by me through the open door, positioning himself between me and this gray figure, which had to be 10 feet tall. Initially, it was not looking my way, but the growl from Charlie caught his complete and total attention. The moonlight seemed to reflect off his eyes as it turned to face Charlie, giving them an amberous reflection. That allowed my mind to realize and come to terms with the fact that this was some type of monster. Then, it stepped forward out of the cornfield and into the open. I still remember the way my dad said it. Oh my fucking goodness. What I saw was a giant wolf head. It was 4 times the size of Charlie's head, and his snout was thick, wide, and long. It had a fresh scar on its nostrils. Then there was this popping noise, like the sound of a human joint crackling, but way louder, and this animal was down on all 4s in a split second. My father reacted, pulling me into the house while firing his shotgun at the creature and slamming the door behind us. Charlie was left outside to fend for himself. There was barking, and then a loud yelp, and Charlie cried out in pain. Then came the loud thud against the top of the door. That night was horrific, with sounds of screams from drum and gunfire. The entire farm was alive with hogs and chickens panicking and making noise. Along the side of the house, it sounded like something was dragging its claws the entire length of the house. They were on the roof walking, looking in the windows, growling. Barnabas, my grandfather's best friend, counted 12 different creatures that night. The odd thing was, they were sure that they were hitting these animals, but the bullets seemed to not even slow them down at all. That night was long and terrifying, and at sunrise, the 10 men in the barn shared their descriptions of these beasts. Some were slender and lean, with wolf heads and shorter snouts. They all switched from 2 legs to 4 legs rapidly. They found Charlie's body torn to pieces among the rows of dead corn in the back of our property. That day, no one showed up to log the property. and 5 of the 10 volunteers left the property, urging my family to leave as well. Barnabas was on the fence about staying. Mr. David, the foreman, was hell-bent on finishing the job and getting paid. So he went to another county and hired a crew of workers. Part of their agreement for employment was that they had to spend the night on the property in the barn. That way they could work early and maximize the day. That 15-man crew only lasted 24 hours. They all left in the middle of the night when a deer carcass was dropped through a hole in the roof of the barn. The kill was so fresh that the deer's legs were still kicking and moving as it hit the ground, squirting blood from its neck where its head was torn off. This was the beginning of the end of my time on the farm. My father was now very worried about me being on the property. Meanwhile, Ed Sr. had met a man who was a part of a big game hunting club. Seeking his help, he tried to explain to him the nature of these animals that they would be hunting. But the man was convinced that he could track and kill these animals. So the next day, 8 big game hunters entered the property and went to the backside into the woods with intentions of spending the night. At 5 a.m., only one man returned, frantically beating on the back door of the house. He was speaking in odd tones and gibberish. Whatever he saw made him lose his mind. That very same day, I was taken to be with my grandmother in a city 50 miles away. And 2 weeks later, there was nothing left of the farm. The chickens and hogs were all killed, along with the dogs. The barn had been set afire in a desperate attempt to escape the gray one. That was the name that had been given to the large gray wolf that I saw, who turned out to be the leader of the pack, which had over 20 members. Ed Sr., my grandfather, finally abandoned the property when one evening, before dusk, he spotted the gray one and 10 other dogmen standing on the ridge line looking down on the property. He realized that daylight provided no security from these animals. So he left the property with the intentions of regrouping and planning to come back and take back our ancestral home. Okay, guys, so that's part 1 of Dogman Siege of Lockett Ranch. Great story. Just a small amount of inside baseball, and as you guys know, this video is a bonus video in which I have attached the inside baseball from the last 10 stories to the back of this, so you guys are going to be listening for a while. But in between that, I want to tell you this real quickly. It's divided into 3 parts because each part is being verified by Ed himself, and he's replying back and giving me small things that need to be edited that I may have gotten incorrect. So it's been divided into 3 parts, and this is very lengthy, and overall it's a very epic story. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Now you're going to be ushered into the inside baseball from the last 10 stories that were out. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's rather lengthy, and it should definitely be entertaining for you. And here we go. The truth is out there.
It is one of the world's greatest mysteries, Scotland's legendary Loch Ness Monster. So does the lake creature actually exist? Well, if you ask one man, he'll tell you it is in fact no myth.
Every day is flaunted in front of your face.
Hundreds of people in the valley say they are hearing voices in their heads.
You just choose to ignore it.
Belief can be a powerful force. No one knows that better than the people who are sure they've seen Bigfoot.
Real accounts.
He says he knows who's playing mind games.
Rogue government officials that are sponsoring this, also corrupt business officials, and private citizens.
From real people.
Hundreds of people turned out tonight for the unveiling of a very controversial statue.
Yeah, it really is. The Satanic Temple of Detroit revealed the 1-ton bronze statue.
It's time for you to take a swim.
I'm just excited to see my Lord and Savior Baphomet represented in such glorious Italian stone. I do hope his eyes gaze upon me, and that my allegiance is recognized.
In the dark waters. Okay, guys, it's Dark Waters, and I'm back with another Inside Baseball. First of all, let me apologize because it's taken a little while for me to get this video out to you guys. But on the back end, you will be very, very happy and satisfied with the product that comes out next. So let's get to answering the questions, and let's talk about some things. Number one, Josh Smith says, "Hey, Dog Water, any word on that video that tells what happened to you, your 12-year-old family member?" I didn't agree to do a video, but I will tell you what happened to my cousin. His name was Robert. I will not give his last name because, again, some things should stay private. But Robert lived in Philadelphia. And when he made 12 years old, he became mysteriously ill. And when I say mysteriously ill, I mean he was at a soccer game, playing soccer. He started feeling shortness of breath, and he went into the hospital. His mother, who is not related to me by blood, but she married into our family, ends up spending the night with him in the hospital, and he passes away. Now, what she told our family was that at 3 o'clock in the morning, she was sleeping next to him in a bed, the lights flickered, and she saw a large shadow in the corner of the room. And then he flatlined in the bed. And that was the story that she told us. She was the only person in the room with him. The doctors rushed in, tried to revive him, but he died. When he died, I had to be almost 19 years old. I was 19 years old when he died, or 18 years old. And no other children in our family have passed, at least on that side of the family. The Sahara Wolf wants to know, beautiful young lady, by the way, wants to know, did my grandmother love me? And I would say that my grandmother, there were times when she was a loving person. But, well, my grandmother's still alive, and I'm talking about her in past tense because she's very old. She's like 96 years old. So there were times, like I said, where she was loving that I remember as a child. But I do also remember her and my mother having vicious arguments about myself and my sister, and the way she treated us. How many children did she have? I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I had 5 uncles and 4 aunties, so she had 9 children in all. And as you can tell, 9 children kind of spiral out to be a huge family. Next question, did I think she loved my grandfather? That I don't know. My grandfather died in his 50s. He died of a heart attack in the car. He was coming home from church one Sunday, pulled up in the driveway, and just died. I mean, like a sudden death. Now, my grandfather worked his whole life at as a welder. I know that my grandmother never worked a day in her life because he always worked. And he literally pulled in the driveway and died. And we all thought it was like the weirdest crap on the planet because the day before that he was cutting grass. He was, this guy was super active. It wasn't like he was one of those guys who's like, oh, I'm old and out of shape. I mean, he's 50 something years old, man. I mean, he just pulled up in the driveway and died. I never really asked my older cousins, what they thought that was about, and I'd rather not speculate on it. But he was a very hard-working man. One of the things I remember about him is that he lost a finger in an accident at work, and I always remember him starting a lawnmower with 4 fingers. And he was a cool guy. He really was a cool guy. Another question that Sahara Wolf is asking is, did my grandmother regret anything as far as my cousin passing? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Essentially, my mother died of cancer, about 13 years ago? And I stopped associating with that side of the family because I watched as she, it wasn't a sudden death of cancer. It was a slow progress. It was a slow death of cancer, and I watched as some of her family members didn't even come check on her. They weren't too far away from her. They were no more than an hour or two away. So I watched how they treated my mother, and after that, I just disassociated myself with that side of the family. I think it's a good thing that I did it. All right, that's enough of my family business. You guys digging all in my business, about to have me cry. All right, Stormy203's question is: out of all the paranormal creatures, which one is your favorite? I don't really have a favorite paranormal creature. I have the one that I'm most afraid of, and I would say that's Dogman. I have a newfound respect for this creature. And the reason why I say that is because, just in my research and talking to people who've had encounters, and then from my own encounter, which I really didn't see anything, but I heard them coming. This is and I don't want to use a metaphor, that's something that everybody's using. It's kind of cliche. But these things, people who encounter these things, their lives are changed forever. And I think that once you encounter something that shifts your context on the entire world and how you view the world, I think that's something that should be, especially something that shifts it in a negative way, the way that these Dogmen do. I think that's something that should be feared. And it's very scary. All right, next question is from Edward. Ed's question is: have you done any collaborations with any other YouTubers? I have reached out to a lot of the guys on YouTube. And just so you guys know, the reason why I'm so appreciative of Vic Cundiff and Brenton Swain is because these guys have been receptive to what I'm doing and have been open to working with me. As far as the horror narrators, I've reached out to pretty much each and every one of them. And for you guys, if you don't know, there's something like 60 horror narrators on YouTube. When I tell you I reached out to people who had 5 subscribers all the way up to people who had 1 million subscribers and haven't heard anything back from not one of them. And I'm fine with that. If you guys would like to see some collaborations and you are a subscriber of one of those guys, just shoot them a message. Say, hey, I think you should just shoot them a message and say, hey, I think you should do a collaboration with this guy, Dark Waters. But I've sent my messages out, and I don't think I'm going to be sending anything else out. If they want to reach out to me, great. If not, then I'm just going to keep it moving and do what I'm doing. I think that I bring a new, refreshing outlook to the way horror is narrated, because it really is true horror stories. All right, so let's get to talking about some of the stories that were in the list of 10 stories. The story in which I played the gentleman's voice who was speaking and telling the story himself about the Hellhound. So that guy is a close friend of mine, very close friend. I've known him for years. I actually did some business with him. And that story came up because I asked him to retell the story of the 2 women sitting on this lawn and the hellhound that he saw sitting in the median. It was years ago, and I would say prior to Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. So that was in 2005, and we're in 2016. So it was prior to that. So it's been over 10 years when that happened to him. And I remember he and I were working on a housing project when that happened, and he walked into the office and he talked about he was shook up by what happened to him. And I asked him just to retell that story, and it is a true story. And just some inside baseball, that guy is probably one of the smartest entrepreneurs here in the city of New Orleans. And he's had a lot of encounters with different crazy things that have happened to him. Shadow people and ghosts and angels. He has a little bit of a psychic ability to where, he's the kind of person that you can walk up on and he'll tell you what you're thinking before you open your mouth. Or before you call him, he'll call you and say, hey, I know you're worried about such and such. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. But there's no way he would know that. There's no way that he knew or had any prior knowledge to what you were thinking about calling him about. I've experienced that with him. So he's a very special individual. Very, very special individual. The story with the police officer who works the paranormal cases here in New Orleans, that police officer is a friend of a friend. He's been on the force for, I want to say 25 years, 27 years. He's an avid cigar smoker, which is how we met. Not how we met, but where we met for him to start telling me some of his stories. And he has a boatload of wild stories. Like, he has the real dirt on the underground of New Orleans. I'm talking about ritual sacrifice, hellhounds, ghosts, vampires, things that go bump in the night that people don't believe exist here in New Orleans, or you try and push to the back of your mind. He has a boatload of information on it, and he's been sharing it with me. And we chose that hellhound story to be the first story that I told for him, because it really was one of the first things that opened his mind to the paranormal, truly opened his mind to the paranormal activity. In a story, it talks about him being a member of a special force, and it talks about him being on a force for a number of years, but that actually was his first time out on a case like that, on a call like that, because he was new to this particular force, which is actually it's only 4 officers who deal with this type of stuff here in the city of New Orleans. So he was new. He was the rookie of the group, and that kind of was like his cherry getting popped, that event that happened. And he goes on to talk about all kind of stuff. The very final story about the exotic dancer who was stalked was submitted by a subscriber, and I hope that she really, really enjoyed that story. I did my best to bring it to life and tried to put you in the scene, and I really appreciate you for submitting that story. It was a wonderful story, and I want to tell you thank you. I don't have any inside baseball on that, but I just want to tell her thank you. So, the criminal court story. The woman in that story is actually a Vietnamese American, and she's like the most hilarious person you will ever meet in your life. I mean, she is funny as hell, and so the way I came across that story is the judge who she works for in the criminal court. The judge's husband and I are very good friends, and so we're at Starbucks, and she just happened to walks up while he and I are talking, and she starts talking about this freaky, creepy thing that happened today. But she was like, this creepy thing happened today, but you guys won't believe it. And normally people they don't encourage those kind of conversations, so I just encouraged her to talk. I said, you'd be surprised at what I believe. And so she started telling a story about this guy that she thought was so handsome and so attractive, and he was so muscular. And she was like, but he's a fucking demon. She's like, he's a fucking demon. And I mean, it was just hilarious how she told the story. And, you know, she demonstrated herself running off. And if you could imagine someone running like an athlete running, the way she was running off in person when she was demonstrated, she was running with her hands in the air above her head and with her wrists flipping around and her fingers pointing straight up. It was just crazy when she told the story. It wasn't a funny story, but she's such a comedic type person that it made her frightening encounter funny, because it's just how she is. She's just hilarious individual. Somehow, guys, I forgot one story, and I will submit that story to you guys later. I'm going to try and stick with the 10 story type theme, where it's an hour worth of horror as opposed to 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or, you know, like some of these other guys do. You know, they do 30 minutes. And I know that for my channel, it may not be as healthy, because I know that the more videos you post, the more views you get and the more money you make. But I'm more of quality over quantity type person. I really want you to have a quality experience, and I feel like the quality of my work will make up for the quantity that other people are doing by posting 3 videos a week and 12 videos a month. And I really believe that the quality of my work will make up for it. So I'm betting on quality. And I mean, and the only way to do that is to take my time and put it together the right way and not just put out some bullshit just to be putting it out. So I know that some of you guys may not like that, but that's how I'm choosing to do it. So another story. Destin, Florida, the little girl the teenage girl who was playing with the electronic Ouija board and got possessed. Now that story is very interesting because there's a lot more to the backside of that story that I didn't touch on because I didn't have permission to. So at the end of the story, it says that her mother says she's still not the same girl. But it goes way deeper than that because the girl, when she got back home, I almost said her name. When she got back home, her mother and her father noticed such a change in her. She went from being a bubbly, fun personality to a 180-degree opposite, a very dark, menacing personality in her home. And this went on for 6 months until her father went to go see a friend. That friend had a family priest. That priest came and prayed over her, and then she turned back normal. It wasn't an exorcist. It wasn't like, oh, she was spinning with her head around, spitting and vomiting. But that priest came and prayed over her. Now, it wasn't a short prayer. We prayed over for hours, according to what I was told, 2 hours. And she came back to being normal. And now she's the same normal little girl. And I keep saying little girl, I guess because I'm older. 16, 17 is little, but she's back to being a normal girl. Their normal daughter is, I guess, the best way to describe it. When they asked her about the Ouija board and will she ever do it again, she said there's no way on God's green earth that she would ever mess with anything like that again. She knew that she wasn't normal, but she felt like she couldn't control herself. That's a little inside baseball for you guys and just some of the things that are going on. Oh, no, I was supposed to. Another thing I wanted to share with you guys. So, and it comes rushing back to me, so I'm just going to keep talking and edit this. Another story something I wanted to share with you guys. So, the story about the guy who's experiencing a gang harassment, that was one that I've had that for a while. I've had that for a while. I've had that for over a month and a half now. And I really did a lot of thinking on what I put it out because he really is being harassed in ways that are insane. And so I decided that I would put it out knowing that there was a chance that some of that might come my way. And so far I've seen a few little things happen that are kind of peculiar, but nothing along the lines of what him and his family are experiencing. But for example, at my office now, when I walk in, I guess to put it to you like this, at my office now, when I first walk in and I open the doors every day, I'm the first person there. The minute I walk in, the phone rings. Like the minute I walk in the door, the phone rings. It's happened for the past 7 days. I'll answer and the person hangs up. Almost like someone letting me know that, hey, I know where you are, right? I've had a message left for me. I had a message left for me at one of the cigar shops that I frequent. And the owner said, hey, there was a guy that came in looking for you and he left you a message. And the message just said hello. There have been a couple of things that have happened, and maybe the people who are harassing this guy have caught feelings and they feel a little bit upset about me helping this guy out. But if it escalates anymore, I will let you guys know. I doubt it if it will escalate anymore, because I've already taken some actions to ensure that it won't. And I think once the message gets back to the people once my message gets back to the people who I know that may be involved, I think it all go away on my end. I can't make it go away on his end. I really can't. There's nothing I can do for him on that. And I don't want to be caught in the middle of that, because he really is being harassed in a way that is profound. And it's my belief that these people wish to drive him insane and force him to kill himself. He's a God-fearing man, and I think his heart rests with the Lord. And I think that if it wasn't for his faith, I think he would have killed himself by now. Well, I won't say I think. I know if it wasn't for his faith in God, he would have already killed himself. You know, just the conversation that we have and how he references the Bible, when he references his faith, it's his strength. And I believe that being so sturdy and so firm in his beliefs, I think that gives him an otherworldly strength to deal with those type of things. I still have suggested that he leave the city and move away. I don't know if he's going to do it or not, but I suggest that anyone who finds themselves in a situation similar to his, the ultimate solution is just moving away from it. It's the smart thing to do. Just get away from that type of situation. Okay, so that wraps up the Q&A portion of this video. Up next, I just want to bring to you a little bit of a bonus, which is a snippet from part 2 of the Dogman story. So I'll quickly get into that, and then you guys are out of here. So thanks for sticking with me for the past hour and listening to everything I have to present. I appreciate it. It had been 2 months since my family abandoned our ancestral property. Some of my father and grandfather said they were going back to retrieve some personal items, including the deed to the property. I was both excited and worried. Ed Sr., my grandfather, called his trusted friend, Barnabas, and the 4 of us took the hour-long drive to the property. The sight of the house brought back memories of the night I spent in the attic with my grandmother, while my dad and others fought off the creatures we now were calling wolfmen. The sound of Charlie, my favorite dog, being killed while defending me, and the sounds of the creatures on the roof of the house all came flooding back to me in my mind like someone had opened a faucet of memories. I was snapped back to reality when Barnabas opened the door to the truck and stepped out with his shotgun. He looked at me and said, "Boy, to the roof. If you see something, fire a single shot and don't shoot at them." Dad backed the truck up right up to the front porch, and I climbed from the top of the truck to the roof of the house. On the roof, I was able to see the entire property. It had fallen into such disarray. Long gone was the well-cut grass. In its place was high weeds. Vines had begun to run along the side of the house, and the place I remember was starting to fade. It felt gloomy, as if there was a dark energy surrounding the property. I sat there staring out at the shell of the home that I used to live in. These creatures had taken everything from my family. There in that moment, I was angry, not afraid. I knew what my father and grandfather were feeling as they searched the house for the deed of the property. While deep in thought, I began to catch that familiar scent of wet hair, blood, and urine. The scent of one of those creatures was blowing in from the north side of the property. Over near the barn was one of them, with his nose pointing straight in the air, sniffing. I was downwind of him, so it wasn't me he was smelling. This one was smaller than the others I had seen. It was standing on its hind legs and looking around. It was jet black, and its fur stood out against the red paint on the barn. It stood there for a few seconds, then took a quick leap, clearing about 30 feet, landing and then sprinting off into the wood line. I was sure it hadn't seen me. However, I had to alert the others to its presence. So instead of firing a shot, I jumped down into the bed of the truck and entered the house. Why did I do that? Our home, which was beautiful, had been ransacked. Broken furniture with claw marks spewed all through it. The walls all had claw marks where these monsters had ripped through the plaster, and the back door was completely broken in half. There, I found my father, sitting on a wooden stool among all the destruction. He was in tears. I saw one, Dad. He looked up at me while wiping his face and said loudly, "It's time to go." My grandfather emerged from his bedroom with a stack of papers and some pictures in his hand. Barnabas followed closely behind him with a shotgun. We quickly exited and got into the truck, pulling away. As we drove away, Barnabas pointed to the ridge line. Standing there on a ridge amongst the trees was the gray one, his massive head and muscular body covered in gray hair, leaving no doubt it was him. That day is forever etched in my mind. He became more than just a creature to me. He became the nemesis of our family, an enemy that lurked in the shadows. That day, my grandfather decided he was going to kill the gray one. The next month, Grandpa sold 100 acres of the family property that was west of the house to a wealthy shipping family who wanted land with easy access to the river. He hired a blacksmith to make 2 different types of traps. One was similar to a bear trap, but it was 4 times bigger, with 12-inch spikes that interlocked and curled when shut. The second was a smaller trap that used the same spikes. Grandpa and Barnabas hired another crew of hunters to guard the property, while contractors worked to reinforce our home, adding a 6-inch thick tin roof, special-made reinforced wooden doors, and the fireplace was brick shut. Grandpa had made our home into a fortress. The next 13 months was an all-out war to reclaim our property from these wolfmen.